Today we're going to be talking about the final two major sourcing strategies you can use for Amazon FBA. This video is part 2. See here for part 1, where I talk about the pros and cons of doing online arbitrage and retail arbitrage. In this video we're talking about the pros and cons of doing wholesale and private label. Hi, my name's Simon. I'm a 6-figure Amazon seller in the UK, and today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the 4 major sourcing strategies. Now, before we get into it, I just want to mention my free Discord group. Guys, I've got a free Amazon FBA Discord group. You can come and join that, link in description. You can ask me questions, hang out with like-minded people, and it's just a great community. So check out the link in the description and check that out. So the next sourcing method / strategy is wholesale. And I'm going to say wholesale is aimed more for intermediate to advanced Amazon FBA sellers. So the pros of wholesale are there are a huge variety of items available from wholesalers. It tends to be that a wholesaler will stock hundreds or thousands of different SKUs. Now, it's not necessarily that they're all available or not available or profitable, but you have that variety of items available to you. The second pro is that you're more likely to be able to replenish an item from wholesale. If you find a fantastic deal that you're making, a decent profit on, it tends to be that most wholesalers, unless it's some sort of special one-off deal, you can replenish this thing over and over and over again. And I talk about replens I'll put a video in the description, a link to the video in the description, where I talk about how important replens are to your business. So wholesale is a great way to get replenishable items. The next pro is that there generally are less sellers on items that are from wholesale. Mainly because wholesale is harder to get into and it's harder to get accounts. So we'll talk about those in the cons in a minute. But yeah, there are less sellers generally and less price tanking. It may be that if you buy from a wholesaler, they say you've got a minimum price that you can set, and maybe everyone tries to adhere to that, or there's just less people doing it because the strategy is much more difficult to get into. The next pro is that it's a more scalable business. You can scale your wholesale business to 7, 8, even 9 figures a year in terms of profit or revenue. Wholesale is obviously designed to buy in bulk, and you can really scale your business up. Now, obviously it requires a lot of capital and things like that, systems in place, but that scalability is there. Now let's talk about the cons of wholesale. It tends to be that wholesale is lower return on investment. Now, this is not this is not for every listing, but as a general rule, the ROIs tend to be lower in wholesale. The margins tend to be lower. It's more about a volume business. So you just need to make sure that if you do this, you understand that and know that you need to really churn the items, be getting lots of sales. The next con is that you generally need to be VAT registered to get any good wholesale accounts. Now, again, this doesn't mean every single wholesaler requires you to be VAT registered, but the majority of the good ones do require that. And there's a few reasons for this. 1, it just kind of shows you're serious. 2, also means that you're doing good volumes as well. So, obviously the VAT limit is 90,000 in revenue per year. A lot of these wholesalers probably want you to spend 50, 100 grand with them a month. So obviously you need to be VAT registered. Obviously they have to be quite a big wholesaler, they have to be quite a big seller, but generally, you need to be VAT registered, but there are exceptions to this rule. It is harder to get accounts. Generally, the better the wholesaler, the harder it is to get an account. Now, it's a bit of a weird one because you'd think these businesses would want business, but it seems to me, from my experience talking to other wholesalers, that a lot of these big wholesale sellers, I should say, that a lot of these wholesalers don't want the hassle of Amazon sellers. So oftentimes you can't mention you're an Amazon seller. And secondly, it's just really hard to get those accounts. So you need to persevere, you need to hit the phones and just follow up regularly with all these wholesalers to try and get an account with them. And if you can land a really good account, then you can make a huge amount of money, but you've got to work for them. The next con is that most wholesalers sell a specific sort of category. So it might be that you find a wholesaler that does just home items, for example. Well, that kind of bottlenecks you into a little bit of that just category. If you want to source other things, then you need to find another wholesaler. So it just can be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm a big believer in, specifically sticking to a specific category. But yeah, generally wholesalers are specifically to a specific category and niche, and if you want to expand beyond that, you need to try and find another wholesale account out there, which means more work on your end, trying to open the account, maintain relationships, putting in orders and stuff like that. So it can be a bit more intensive from your point of view in terms of admin and labor and stuff like that. The next con is that generally when you're doing wholesale, you can't use a credit card without paying a big fee, basically 3, 4, 5% or whatever the cost is. You certainly won't be able to use Amex without a big fee. Most of these guys are going to set you up with payment terms, which will be paid via bank transfer, or you're going to have to pay right away with either a debit card or bank transfer, which means, no credit basically without having a good relationship with these guys, which means you're going to need a decent amount of capital. There's no credit here, guys, unfortunately, when you're starting out. And that brings us on to the final con, and that is the minimum purchase order. Some of these wholesalers have minimum purchase orders. Well, most of them do. Now, it might only be a couple of £100, might be 500 quid, but it might be £5,000. Generally, the better the wholesaler is in terms of the items that are available, the bigger the purchase order is going to be, the minimum purchase order. And this could be 5, 10, 15, £20,000 per order. Not great if you're just starting out on Amazon. And obviously, the next con, which I wasn't going to mention actually, but if you're having to order £20,000 worth of stuff from a wholesaler, or even £5,000, if you make a mistake as a beginner, you're now stuck with all this stock, a huge amount of stock, versus sort of OA, where if you order 10 items, your damage is a little bit mitigated, not so bad. Now, before we go on to talk about the pros and cons of private label, I want to mention my sponsor, Profit Protector Pro. Profit Protector Pro is literally the best repricing you can get for any Amazon FBA seller in the UK, in my opinion. I've been using it now for about 8 weeks and I've made nearly £3,000 in extra profit because of the algorithmic strategies that they have built into the software. Now, there's 2 reasons I love it. The first one is that it's really easy to use. The second is that they've got these fantastic algorithmic AI strategies that you can use and apply to whatever listing you have, and you can use that to increase sales, increase profit, or whatever you want to do basically. And as you can see, I've made an extra £3,000 above the minimum price, where Profit Protector Pro has worked hard to push my prices up and get the buy box sales in above those minimum prices. So if you guys want to check out Profit Protector Pro, I've got a link in the description. The final method we're going to talk about is private label, and this is definitely aimed, in my opinion, at advanced sellers. I don't recommend private label for beginners. So the first pro of doing private label is once you've created your listing, generally you'll get no other sellers on your listing. There'll be no price tanking on your listing, no other sellers to compete with, and basically that listing is your domain for you alone. Now, that doesn't stop other sellers creating another listing with a very similar or the same product, and then you can price tank that and you have to compete with them. But obviously that's a little bit more advanced, unlikely as well. But yeah, generally price tanking doesn't happen quite as much. The listing is yours and yours alone. The next pro, and the biggest one I think about doing private label, is you can build a brand. And once you've built a brand, you can sell it. None of the previous strategies I've mentioned, apart from maybe wholesale, is a sellable business. Generally, when you stop, it stops. But with private label, if you build a valuable brand, there are companies out there that, aggregators I think they're called, where they basically buy up loads of private label companies from Amazon sellers. So you could potentially get 2 or 3 times your annual profit, maybe even more, maybe even a higher multiple, by selling your brand to one of these sort of aggregators. So that's something to keep in mind. Generally, the profit and the margins are higher with private label. You're buying these items from China. They oftentimes cost very little. A bit of shipping involved in there, and then generally the profit and the margins are higher. However, there are things to keep in mind, and I'll mention those in the cons in a few minutes when it comes to private label. But yeah, generally you have higher ROIs and higher profits. The next pro is that it's a more reliable income stream. Once you've got your listing and you've got a number of sales coming in, it becomes more reliable. And it becomes more reliable from like a restock point of view. You know that you need to restock this item every month or 2. You know roughly how many sales comes in. You can always replenish this, unless obviously the manufacturer goes out of bust or goes out of business. But yeah, generally it's a more reliable business, and yeah, you can restock this thing over and over and over. As long as it's selling, you can restock it. The next pro is that you have way more scope to negotiate your prices and cut your costs and increase your price of your item. So obviously, if you order more items from the manufacturer, you can tend to get the cost of goods down on those items. You can maybe then start looking at shipping containers, like getting just a shipping container for yourself, which again brings the shipping cost down. You can raise the price of your listing potentially, obviously within reason. It gives you more scope to try and manufacture some extra profits in there, whether it's say ordering more quantity, reducing shipping costs, maybe some logistical thing you can do, or putting prices up. You can also change your listing as well, things like that. There's more scope basically to improve your profits. Now let's go on to the cons of private label. The first one is the lead times are enormous. If you order something from China and you're sending it in via sea, it's going to take 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks maybe before it lands in the UK. So that's a very long time versus retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, where you can basically get it same day, next day. So that needs to be factored in. Obviously, you need higher capital because you're ordering items. Let's say you put a purchase order in for £5,000. It takes 12 weeks to land in the UK. Well, that £5,000 just basically sat in the ether, or the Atlantic Ocean or whatever ocean it's coming through, shipping to the UK. So that £5,000 is basically doing nothing for a very long time. So while we say that the profits and the margins are higher, you can't necessarily churn your money as quickly. The next con is, again, similar to wholesale. Generally, you can't use Amex. Generally, you can't use credit cards without any fees. It'll be bank transfer or debit cards. Again, makes it more difficult if you've got limited capital to do private label. The next con is all the hidden costs that no one talks about. And these generally come down to advertising. PPC, pay-per-click, is very expensive on Amazon, and you need to do this to get your product selling, basically. Unless you've got some sort of magical product that everyone's searching for and wants to buy, you have to promote it. And a lot of people who post their charts online of their sales and their profits from private label aren't factoring the advertising costs, which can be very large, and they can really hurt your profit margins. The next con is that it can be very expensive if you get it wrong. Just like with wholesale, if you're doing a £5,000 order and you get it wrong and the products are either junk or don't sell, or the wrong item, or whatever's happened, basically, you are basically stuck with that stock, and you either have to sell it for a loss or just basically write it off and throw it down the tip. So it can be a much more expensive mistake if you get things wrong with private label. The next con, although you can look at this as a pro maybe if you're a big fan of learning, but there's way more to learn and to do with private label. Unlike with doing online arbitrage where there's an existing listing, you have to create the listing, sort out photographs, do the description, figure out your PPC, your pay-per-click advertising campaign, and maybe even hire a manager for that. You need to sort stock control out. You need to sort out your logistics as well. You've got import and custom fees to deal with as well. If you need to restock an item, you need to wait 8, 12 weeks for it to arrive from China, unless you get it shipped by air, which is way more expensive. So you need to be thinking way more about the logistics, reordering, stock control. There's a whole plethora more things to think about with private label than there is just ordering things online from game.co.uk where you can get stuff next day delivery. So, while that could be a good thing, you learn a lot of cool stuff, it's a lot more to learn and a lot more to manage. And the final one is dealing with suppliers. This can be a total pain in the you're going to be awake when the Chinese guys are awake. You're going to have to contact loads of people on Alibaba. Most of them are not going to reply. They have poor English maybe. Just trying to negotiate with them, trying to get them to agree to terms. It can be a pain, basically. It's a whole extra, and this comes to the previous, con that I mentioned before. It's a lot more work, basically. You're having to negotiate with suppliers. Now, obviously, it can be a good thing because you can negotiate prices down, all this kind of stuff like that, as we mentioned before. But yeah, it becomes a lot of work, basically, just trying to deal with suppliers and trying to nail down a supplier for your item. So, guys, I hope you found that video useful. Let me know in the comments what sourcing strategy you prefer for Amazon and what you're maybe doing now and what you plan for the future. And yeah, guys, don't forget to join my free Discord group, link in the description. And as always, guys, like, comment, subscribe. Peace.